Hi gentle people, good morning and welcome back on the channel for this second part of the BMW R75 Sidecar. In this first episode we have seen how to realize the engine section, the wheels and the exhaust, and we also speak a little bit about the construction problems and we close the frame. So now let's tackle the remaining challenges. As you can see on these images, we start with the sidecar conception. Now again, as I explained in the first episode, we are facing the same issues with the lack or the total absence of anchor point and anchor holes. This obviously contributes highly to a loss of time and much more difficulties to align all the pieces correctly. Luckily, all the adjustments are quite precise. I decided to build a sidecar in two steps. The first step being gluing only one side and the lower rear wall, just to leave the sidecar open to give me the opportunity to paint the interior correctly. Globally, there is no big difficulties. There are also a few little accessories to glue in position before this painting. And to ease this painting, I also decided to only glue one part of the seat. I also decided to build the sidecar chassis separately. It's quite easy to build, no big issue. Anyway, 2 points, two little observation. The first one is they provide us with a beautiful fuel jerry can, but they do not provide the support. So that's a bit strange. You will have to do your own support in scratch. I did mine with actual photograph from a real motorcycle using evergreen strip. The second observation is the toolboxes. I already mentioned this in the first episode. These toolboxes are hollow. It's quite ugly, so I decided to fill them with Tamiya epoxy putty, which is a two-component putty. Okay, all pieces ready. It's now time to wash them a little bit with soap and water and to prime them. For the primer, as explained in the first episode, I used Mr. Mahogany Surfacer 1000, diluted with Real Color thinner. The ratio is 40% surfacer and 60% thinner. Here I work with an air pressure of 1.5 bar and my needle of 0.4 millimeter. I also did the corrections on the fuel tank after the assembly of the frame. As you can have seen in the previous episode, it was necessary to correct the gluing seam with cyanoacrylate to sand it, so a small correction is required, but it is also a nice opportunity to check that the gluing seam on the fuel tank has completely disappeared. After the primer, it's time for the German grey base coat application. It consists of 70% of XF63 Tamiya German grey, 5% X3 royal blue, 5% XF57 buff and 20% XF2 flat white. This mixture is further diluted with 50% thinner, and for the airbrush work I work with 1.5 bars of pressure and my needle of 0.2. We can now start the painting of the sidecar interior. I started with black to paint the connecting straps between the wooden slats of the floor, and I take the advantage of this opportunity to paint all the different seats and some little details, accessories. Now let's talk about quickly the weathering of the inside of the sidecar, and basically it will be the same process for the outside. To extend the colorimetric range of any base coat, the use of oil paint is really important and really nice. This is especially true for dull colors, like here you have a complete model which is supposed to be dark gray or German gray. In the real life, a base coat is suffering from a lot of alteration. Paint can suffer from the UV, the solar UV, can suffer from the exhaust heat, from the rain, from the snow, from the salt, the repeated passage of the crew, the intervention of the technical crew. So there are many factors that can influence the appearance of the base coat throughout the years of operational use. The replacement of some older parts is also an operational reality. That's why I decided, for example, to create a dark yellow jerrycan and a dark yellow toolbox with another type of camouflage. So to reflect this kind of colorimetric range, I use here 4 oil paint references. So you have titanium white for fading the color, ochre yellow to bring some dirt, cobalt blue to reinforce the bluish aspect of the paint, and burnt umber also to create some dirt and reinforce the shadow effect. So as you can see, I just put some dots of each of these colors really randomly. These are tiny spots. Watch out not to put too much oil paint, because oil paint is really a kind of concentration of pigment, so that's really effective. So you put tiny dots everywhere, and then I pull it, I blend it with my natural bristle paintbrush, here the Recap 316. So you see immediately, if you brush your piece vertically, you are creating streaks, while if you beat or punch the paint, it will diffuse more locally. So you have the choice depending on the effect you want to create. What is nice also with this technique is that you can remove the excess. You just have to pull the paint with a little bit more white spirit, and immediately you will take out the excess of paint you have put on the piece. The aim is to blend these colors as much as you can, because the aim is not to create a kind of Smarties effect. It should be really diffuse, really blended, so that it's barely visible. That's really important, to continue to pull, to blend the colors until you barely see the effect. This is why it's so important to work with a natural bristle paintbrush, because the blending effect will be much smoother. It is also, to my opinion, important to leave linseed within your paint to give the pigment within this binder the capability to travel and to blend between each others. When the result is okay to my eyes, I generally pass several times with a completely dry flat paintbrush, just to increase the blending between all these pigments. I then reinforce the shadow with burnt umber, so I apply this oil paint pure and I punch it until the desired result. You can also use raw umber for this step, there is no problem with that. You will see that that's what I did on the exterior. Obviously you have to work quite logically, applying this mixture in all the areas more prone to dirt accumulation. In the previous episode I show you how to realize buff color with oil paint. So briefly to recap this, you take a lot of titanium white, you add a little bit of lamp black, you mix both to realize a light gray color, and afterwards you add a little bit of ochre yellow to create a buff color. You can increase progressively the amount of ochre yellow until you reach the desired buff effect. You can then use it pure to create strong dust areas, or like here you can dilute it with white spirit and reach the desired concentration by adding oil paint or adding white spirit until you reach the desired density. Here is our do-it-yourself dust effect product. So I then use this dust wash, in all the crevices on the sidecar floor to progressively dust these areas. Dust is a kind of dirt which is accumulating through time, so it's quite logical to apply it after the dirt layer we applied previously. And just for you to know, there is no drying time between each step, so all these steps have been realized the same day, one after the other. I would say just like preparing a tasty paella. You know, you have to prepare all the ingredients one after the others in the same pan. It's especially true with oil colors that will take a lot of hours to dry completely. And during these hours, the pigment can continue to blend together slowly. I then use my buff mixture, pure, to weather all the seeds. So applying this mixture mainly on the edges, but also in the corners or in the small depression. Then blending the oil paint with my paintbrush and white spirit. When I saw the wooden slats for the first time, I thought it will be a nice challenge. These tiny wooden slats are plastic made, a smooth plastic without any texture, so making them appearing like real wood would be a nice challenge. I started to paint them with the reference Grimy Grey 11008 from AK Interactive. This will be my base coat. I then use these three oil paint references, burnt sienna, burnt umber and raw umber on top of this base coat. The predominant color to be used is the burnt sienna. To apply this paint, I use my thinnest paintbrush. It's a natural bristle paintbrush, and I apply very thin lines of burnt sienna alongside these wooden slats. I then use another paintbrush dipped in white spirit, also having a natural bristle. It's a Recap 316, and I start dragging, pulling these oil paint lines with this paintbrush. Do not apply too much white spirit on this paintbrush. You have to dry it a lot. The aim is not to remove the oil paint, but just to drag it and to blend it with the underneath color. After this step, I applied some raw umber and burnt umber dots with my first paintbrush to simulate the presence of some wood knots. Like the first time, I also blend them with the other paintbrush dipped in white spirit. To do so, the idea is to beat the oil paint dots with the paintbrush bristles. I then repeat the first operation, but I replace the burnt sienna by the burnt umber. That is creating longitudinal lines alongside the wooden slats. These lines were also blended like the first passage, but very softly. The idea is not to delete these lines or to blend them too much, but to superimpose different longitudinal lines of different wood tones. I then repeat a third time this step with burnt sienna to create again a kind of orange color longitudinal lines. The process is exactly the same, then brushing softly to create these wood veins. I repeated a second time the wood knots application, that is applying some raw umber dots and blending them very softly by beating the paint locally. So the aim is not to stretch these oil dots too much or to create longitudinal lines, it's just to create spots having darker brown colors. I then fine-tune the result with a little bit more of burnt sienna. The idea is just to work locally where the initial grimy gray is too present and where you want the orange color to be a bit more predominant. So it's quite easy, it's just a progressive work. You have to add progressively the different colors and the different effects in between the wood knots and the wood veins, but I think the result is quite realistic. Sweet, our interior is completely painted and weathered, it's beautiful, so we can now close the bathtub. The fitting is quite good, no big issue with this. You will just have to sand all the gluing seam afterwards. This will be especially true for the front side. As you see, there is a gluing seam in the middle of the front side of the sidecar. So for this part specifically, we will apply the cyanoacrylate technique I show you in the beginning of this video to be perfectly sure that the seam won't be visible. This will be also the moment to fit all the remaining pieces on the main motorcycle body. The engine shield and the exhaust fitting were the two parts most challenging during this process. As I already explained, there is a huge problem with the anchoring holes and the anchoring points of the pieces. So for all the little pedals, it was necessary to drill new holes and to reinforce the anchoring point with lead wire. It was also the moment to fit on the bathtub some more details like the seat, the handle and the machine gun support. If you want to become an expert of the mini drill, this kit is definitely for you. You will also have to drill the holes for all the cable connections around the headlights, but also on the handlebars. And once again here, this work is really delicate due to the size of these pieces. The handlebar alone will receive 5 cables. Time to go back to painting. So as usual, wash and prime all the pieces prior painting. So I already explained these steps in the beginning of the video. And again, priming is nice to discover any cracks left by the gluing seam. It's a nice opportunity to make corrections prior the final paint application. The base coat, as explained earlier and in the previous video, is done with XF63 German grey, Tamiya. 70%. We add a little bit of white, 20%, XF2, a touch of blue, X3, 5%, and a touch of buff, XF57, just to dirt and already pre-weather this paint. Dilution is 50% of paint, 50% of thinner, the lacquer thinner yellow cap from Tamiya. We work with 1.5 bars of pressure and the needle 0.2 millimeter. So far we didn't apply any highlight coat. That's quite normal because we only worked on the interior of the sidecar. Now that we will paint the exterior, it's necessary to apply a highlight coat on all these areas which are prone to solar UVs. So basically all the upper sides of the motorcycle. So to realize this mixture, I increased the white to 40%. And I reduced the German grey to 50%. I did not change the ratio for the blue and the buff. You also need to increase the dilution to 70% of thinner and 30% of paint mixture. Now I work with the needle 0.2 and only 1 bar and without the needle cover to gain in precision. The aim is to work locally. Time for some scratches and corrections using neutral grey and grey blue. I started first to reinforce the highlight on the outline of the bathtub using highly diluted grey blue, as it is, to my opinion, a much more worn out area. Just like for the wheels, it's a 2-step scratch procedure. So the first step is to apply this lighter color, like we did for the wheel, and basically we apply these paints mainly on the edges. We apply obviously these color reference on all the motorcycle parts, including obviously the motorcycle body, but also the front wheel assembly. Prior to starting the second step of the scratch effect with a darker color, I decided to apply a kind of rusty wash within the leaf spring suspension of the sidecar. To do so, I used the medium rust reference from AK, it's an acrylic color, and I diluted it with water. Here the effect was not to produce a completely rusted leaf suspension, so I had to work a little bit with the pigments and diluting with water. Second step of the scratch effects using a leather brown reference. As I said, you can use many references to create this second step of scratch effect. So the idea is to reproduce the scratches, deeper scratches, where the bare metal is visible, so slightly corroded. You have seen previously that I also used the chocolate reference from AK, or the camouflage black-brown from Vallejo. To my point of view, it's not mandatory to use the same reference on the same model for all the deeper scratches. Here, for example, I used the 3 references on this same little motorcycle. As you can see, I started first with the paintbrush, a very small one, just to apply with precision these deeper scratches on top of the lighter spots. As you can see as well, having the chassis not yet assembled on the sidecar is also a big advantage to paint all the components separately. It gives you a much better access to all the parts of the motorcycle. We will obviously focus this work on the more worn out areas of this sidecar. After having realized all these scratches with the paintbrush, we started all over again with the sponge method, just to create a little bit more tiny scratches. Here, watch out not to overdo the effect, so you really have to dry the sponge prior to start the application. We can now assemble the different sidecar components prior the next step of weathering. And prior to continue, I decided to give the model a complete coat of varnish, satin varnish from VMS, just to facilitate the use of all paint, but also to give this little satin finish to the metal. This varnish is really easy to use. It's applied pure, without any dilution. Use 2 bar of pressure, and it has to be applied wet. That means that the surface should be completely gloss, shiny, to confirm the presence of the product. Now, don't be afraid if you overdo a little bit. You see there is a little bit too much of varnish. This varnish is completely self-leveling, so during the drying process, the top layer will even out itself. So watch out. For this reason, it's important not to use the air dryer technique to accelerate the drying time, to allow for this self-leveling property. Personally, I always give 24 hours of drying time to any varnish I apply on my model. That way I'm really sure that the varnish is completely dry and resistant for the future operation. For the registration plate, it will be necessary to prepare this piece with white. The reason is that I decided to use the piece from Eduard in photo etch, which is a bit thicker and a bit nicer, as it comes with nicer anchor points. Anyway, the consequence is that the stencil that will come on this plate, being a little bit undersized, it will be necessary to reproduce the color of the registration plate with the black line all around. On this plate only, I applied gloss varnish from Vallejo Air series with a paintbrush and not with the airbrush, given the size of the piece, in order to make invisible the junction between the white painted on the registration plate and the white of the stencil, of the decal. As I explained, the decal is now a little bit undersized, but this decal anyway has already the black outline on the registration plate, so it will be necessary to remove this black outline. This is a very delicate operation given the size of the registration plate. You have barely 0.1–0.2 millimeters between the digits and this black outline. So watch out here, you have to work with a completely new hobby knife blade. It was only necessary for the front plate. The rear plate was the one of GWH, and that plate has the correct size. So even the rear plate was not painted white. As usual, I use micro scale, micro set and micro sol for decal application. After a few seconds in the water, you will see that the black lines, the black outline will detach from the decal. That's what we were aiming for. We will just recover the white central part. I had no specific problem with the decal sheet. All the decals were strong enough while still being thin enough to be invisible, and the microsol just helped to make it completely disappear and merge with the background. I really appreciated the details of the decals in general, especially the little BMW emblem on the fuel tank side. As I explained, the rear registration plate was the one planned in the kit, so no problem with that one. Just apply the stencil, it fits perfectly with the little photo etched piece from GWH. No problem neither for the speedometer decal, nor for its protecting glass. This glass was glued in position thanks to a PVA glue diluted with water, as you can see on these images. I finally passed a coat of VMS satin varnish above all decals, just to harmonize the glossiness of each piece, and I glued the exhaust system in position with cyanoacrylate glue prior to start with the final weathering. As you can see here, here is what you need for this weathering. So a very tiny paintbrush to apply the oil paints, our Recap 316 for blending these oil paints, and a dry flat brush. With respect to the oil paints, here are the reference you will need from left to right: Land Black, Raw Amber, Titanium White, Ochre Yellow, and Cobalt Blue. These references, of course, can be different for other models and other type of base coats. Just like what we did for the interior, applied very small dots of each color on all the surfaces of the motorcycle. You can, as from this stage on, work logically, trying to put more white on the upper areas to accentuate the highlights, and try to use more raw amber on the lowest part of the motorcycle to accentuate dirt and the shadows. So the raw amber logically will be also used in the corners and the crevices. So as you can see now, we have a mix of all these four colors that we will blend on top of the German grey base coat. That's a nice way to greatly improve the colorimetric range of our base coat, especially with a monochromatic paint like the German grey. Okay, now let's speak once again about the blending of these oil paints. So, as I already shown, I use my Recap 316 red stable to perform this action. That's a natural bristle paintbrush. So to blend these colors, I first dip my paintbrush in white spirit. I remove quite a lot of white spirit from this brush on a piece of paper, and then I start punching the oil paint, or I start pulling, dragging these oil paints. It depends mainly on the result I want to achieve. So punching, like I am doing now, is more for an horizontal blending of these colors. So mainly for flat surfaces, which are horizontal. Top of the turret, top of the toolbox, top of the sidecars, things like that. Now for the vertical surfaces, like the side of these boxes, I do prefer blend these colors by pulling vertically, dragging these colors. That way I can achieve already at this stage some streaks, some vertical streaks. To do so, starts to pull from up to down these oil paint dots, and once this streak is appearing, you can further continue to blend it by stretching these streaks vertically in both directions. Now, that doesn't mean that I do not punch my oil paints on vertical surfaces. I do punch these colors as well on vertical surfaces. Again, it's a matter of result and on what visual effects you want to achieve. Like here, for example, I'm on top of the sidecar, but I'm dragging these oil paints to create some streaks. It's just because this top side is slightly descending towards the front side. So the natural streak, the natural flow of dirt and dust when it's raining, for example, is from the highest point towards the lowest point. So in this case, from the rear part towards the front side. So that's mainly a matter of visual effect, and that's only your eyes that will decide if you want to punch it or if you want to drag it. You can of course combine both actions. For example, here I'm punching these streaks to further blend them. The most important point is that all these effects should be really subtle. You really need to continue the blending until that point where it is barely visible. And generally speaking, I use my big flat paintbrush, the dry one, to further improve the blending of these colors. What is important also is that this big flat brush, which is dry, should remain dry. I use the same brush during the whole weathering process without cleaning it with white spirit. So as you can see, I applied the same technique on all the motorcycle parts. So as I already explained, try to work logically. So for example here, I take advantage of this step to already apply some more raw umber on the registration plate. That will be obviously, especially at this location, really dirty. Do not forget any part of the motorcycle, of your model. It's very important. Every little part should be treated that way. Even the tube of the motorcycle frame are also treated with local oil paint dots. Immediately after this first step, I reinforced the dirt effect on the lowest section of the motorcycle using pure raw umber. These are all these areas where dirt has collected with time. So here, this dirt layer is applied on top of the previous step we did without any drying time. So there was no drying period between the step we did before and that one. That the aim is really to take advantage of the very long drying time of the oil paints to blend all these effects together. So here is the result after application of raw umber on the lowest part of the sidecar here. So it's clearly visible, this kind of dirty brown zone on the lowest section of the sidecar. And that's only done with pure raw umber, which is correctly blended with paintbrush. To further increase this dirty appearance of the sidecar, I'm now adding some raw umber streaks, vertical streaks, at some location. Basically, these are locations where you can encounter corners, junctions, like here the metallic support of the machine guns, where the dirt and dust could have accumulated, and obviously when it's raining, this accumulation of dirt is falling down the plate in the natural direction. So you can apply these vertical streaks wherever you want, trying to encounter little corners where dirt could have flowed down. We will repeat this process on all the motorbike sections. So here you see the registration plate on the rear side, but also on the front side, have been treated the same way. So applying raw umber pure, and then with the other paintbrush creating streaks and blending these oil paints with the background. For the registration plate, as I wanted a really dirty appearance, I had to repeat this process 2 or 3 times, each time adding a bit more raw umber and dragging it, pulling it to blend it Here what you see with this little paintbrush is I dipped it in white spirit to get the bristles a bit more wet, and I pass vertically on the paint to create more contrasty streaks, as if this dirt had been washed down. You might have noticed that at this stage I still hadn't performed any dark wash, any dark pin wash. And that's exactly what we will do now. So I know that most of the time this dark wash is applied before the other procedures, the other weathering procedures. Now, given we are working all the weathering procedures with oil, without any drying time in between each step, there is no big importance in which order you will apply this sequence. I could have started with this dark wash prior to the weathering. The result would have been the same, as all the pigments anyway will blend with each other during the long hours of drying period necessary. To realize this dark wash, I used a mix of lamp black and raw umber at equal parts, and I diluted them with white spirit. Now you can, and that's what I like with oil paints, you can decide what the density of this wash has to be just by adding oil paint within this mixture, like I'm doing here. So if you judge that this mixture is too thin, just add oil paints. Once ready, you can apply this mixture with a tiny paintbrush. That way you can work really locally, apply this mixture in all the little crevices and all the little details, like around the bolts, around the different corners. You can then accelerate the drying time locally with the air dryer, and you will have to blend anyway a little bit this work with the rest of the work that was done previously with another paintbrush, with the Recap 316, just to blend everything correctly. We will now dust the complete model. Again, all these operations are done the same day, so there were no drying period in between all these steps. Now, if you need to stop and you want to continue one day or two days later, there is absolutely no problem. To create buff color with oil paint, I already explained this in the beginning of the video, but if you arrive just at this section, you just have to mix a little bit of lamp black within a lot of titanium white to create a light gray color. And afterwards you add ochre yellow in small quantities and progressively until you reach the correct buff color you need. Just like we did with the raw umber to create dirty area, we will apply this buff color in streaks if we want to create dust streaks, but we can also use it locally to create dusty areas on horizontal surfaces, especially around corners and enclosed areas. You can see here, for example, the work done on top of the sidecar seat, where dust could have accumulated due to presence of the spare wheel. Here is, for example, the same work done on top of the fuel tank, around, I guess it is the air filter compartment, and you see that there's a typical area where dust could accumulate, as there is a corner and a flatter area. I also use this buff oil paint mixture in wash by adding white spirit very locally, as you can see, in some crevices. Shaft and bearing grease from AK Interactive is a fast, ready-to-use product that substitutes an oil paint wash we can do with lamp black, for example. Here I use it to speckle the top part of the sidecar. Why? Just because normally on top of this sidecar comes a machine gun, the MG34, if I'm not mistaken. And machine guns, when used to fire, obviously, have the bad habit to speckle a little bit of oil in all directions. Let's continue the final detailing with all paints. Here I will use the reference Terra Rosa to create rust spots, but you can also use burnt sienna or make combination of these orange brownish colors to create your own rust colors. Here the idea is not to represent a complete wreckage, so this is an operational vehicle that suffered a little bit, so let's go easy with these rust effects. I will only apply a few dots of rust on the front side of the sidecar, because this is an area prone to paint degradation due to small collisions with obstacles like branches and little stone projections. When looking at some historical reference pictures, you can even see that this front side is quite often bumpy. To represent fuel stains, a good reference is the burnt umber. I apply this reference pure all along the fuel tank cap, as you can see here, and afterwards, like we did for the rest of the oil paint work, I blend the pigments with my flat paintbrush dipped in white spirit. Here it's important to blend it nicely. It's only to create like a small color variation from the base coat. You can apply streaks if you want, just by pulling the oil paint. I did not do it here. And it could be also a nice base, a nice support when using other ready-to-use products like fuel stains that will reproduce fresh fuel leaks. I also use this burnt umber reference to reproduce fresh grease, and in this case you have to apply oil paint in quantities like here, and instead of blending completely this oil paint with your flat paintbrush, just punch it once or twice to leave the oil paints a little bit more consistent. Here is in picture some of these oil paint references we used for this sidecar. The final touch prior assembly is the black pencil. Do not forget this step, it's very important. You can use it on the more worn out areas like the machine gun support, the area of boarding for the passenger, all these axes and tubes which are close to the ground that can be used to climb on this motorcycle, and all the edges that could be more worn out. Here it is, guys. You have all my secrets on this motorcycle construction. Final step is the final assembly, of course. A little bit delicate with the front wheel assembly, but the sidecar assembly on the motorcycle was no big issue. We will also have to create all the cable connections, so for this I use lead wire of 0.4 millimeters. All these cables are connected on the previously drilled handlebar. Some are going to the front headlight, other to the engine, so you will need to check a reference picture, historical reference picture, to see how to organize these cables. Here it is, guys, for this iconic little motorcycle with sidecar. I really hope you have learned some interesting tips and tricks for your own future creation. Don't forget to subscribe and to hit the bell to help grow the channel. See you in the next video, and greetings from Portugal. Ciao, ciao.